it on it. Pack it on it. Did you know that the bromeliad only blooms once in its lifetime and then the plant dies off? However, it does produce pups that you can propagate and will give you new bromeliad plants. I don't see that in the care instructions. Did you know that you're not supposed to water these plants in the soil? You're supposed to water them in the tank of the plant or in the base or leaves of the plant. I'm going to talk about that in watering. Did you know that these plants are actually epiphytic and they don't absorb nutrients through and water through the soil roots? They actually absorb it through the leaves. I'm going to be discussing some of that. So there's a lot of things that are good to know about bromeliads when you're taking care of them, but they can be actually way easier to take care of than other tropical plants that we bring into our home, as long as you know a few things about them. So in this Houseplant Care 101 episode, I'm gonna get right to the point, share all of the things that you need to help make your bromeliad thrive, because it's actually really straightforward and easy. I'll also have timestamps in the description below in case there's a certain section that you want to jump to. This Houseplant Care 101 series is sponsored by RepotMe.com. With RepotMe, you can have all of your houseplant supplies delivered right to your door. They are a one-stop shop for all of your houseplant, orchid, or succulent needs. They have custom handmade houseplant soils ranging from tropical houseplants, cactus and succulents, pothos, snake plants, and more. I cannot live without their clear slotted orchid pots. They have amazing houseplant fertilizers and so much more. I've included their link in my description below, and you can get 10% off any soil with my code Ashley. Bromeliads are such beautiful tropical plants. I mean, their blooms are absolutely stunning. They come in so many different gorgeous colors and shapes and sizes. I mean, I'm obsessed with them, and there's over 3,000 different species. Bromeliads are native to Central and South America, and they're epiphytes, so they latch onto the side of trees just like orchids, and they absorb the nutrients and moisture from the air. They're not parasitic, they don't harm the tree that they latch onto, but that's really good to know because a lot of times people won't pot their bromeliads up in soil. They'll actually put them on a rock or in some sphagnum moss, or there's on a piece of wood. There's so many cool things that you can do because, as I mentioned, these plants don't really absorb their nutrients and moisture through their soil roots, but more so through their leaves. A fun fact, did you know that pineapples are actually part of the Bromeliad family, as are air plants? Bromeliads make absolutely wonderful houseplants. They do really well indoors. They're very adaptable to the indoor conditions that we have. They're really great at purifying the air. Their blooms are absolutely beautiful. They're incredibly long lasting. The plants themselves are very low maintenance as far as what's needed for watering with care, repotting, all of that. I want to discuss the blooms because that's really, I think, the main appeal for a lot of people with bromeliads are the gorgeous, vibrant blooms. And there's a lot of questions on like, how long does it last? How do I make my plant bloom again? Again, these plants only bloom once in their lifetime and then the plant will die off. So we're actually looking at these plants and we're bringing them home towards the end of their life cycle because it can take a long time for a bromeliad to bloom, usually a couple of years. And the bloom will be the first part to die off and then the leaves will follow. So what's really good to do is you'll notice that the bloom will start dying up around here. So if you're looking at your bromeliad and you're noticing that the gorgeous bloom is starting to crisp up, is starting to brown, you're not doing anything wrong probably. I imagine that the bloom is beginning to die off, and the blooms usually last about 6 months to a year, and you don't know how long that plant has been blooming before you brought it home. Now, depending what type of bromeliad you have and the conditions in your home, the bloom can last longer or not as long. Also depends how long it's already been blooming before you brought it home, which you won't be able to know that information. So just know that if it is crisping up and looking a little rough, that's not on you. More than likely. I think a lot of people think, oh, I just kill off the bromeliads, I don't have any luck with them, when really it's not anything we're doing. It's just that we don't understand the life cycle of bromeliads because we're not taught it and it's not in the care instructions. However, this plant wants to survive. It wants future generations of its own self. So what it does is it creates pups, very similar to snake plants, similar to a lot of other plants, and the pups are just baby plants. So what you want to do if you notice that your bloom is dying off and it just looks really rough, The rest of the plant should look good for a while longer. I mean, I'd say 6 months to a year at least. The mother plant itself should be okay. This is the bloom. This is the mother plant. This in here is called the tank. This is where I'm going to show how you actually want to water this plant, because you don't want to really water the soil so much in this plant. And then you can see the pups growing. So this here is a little pup growing off the side there. In this one, you can clearly see the pup, but sometimes the pups will actually grow inside the leaves of the plant. But on this one and on many bromeliads, it'll just grow off to the side. Now you want this to be at least 1/3 the size or half the size of the mother plant before you propagate it by division, if that's what you are wanting to do. So when the bloom's just looking really rough, not so good anymore, all you want to do is just trim it back down to the base of the bloom. So you want to cut off this part of the plant and leave the rest of it. What that's going to do is enable the plant to focus its energy on the pups and the new plants that it's going to be putting off instead of into the dying bloom. And then eventually 6 months or longer, this plant will die off, but by then the pups should be a really, really good size. At that point, you can actually propagate this plant, which I'll be showing how to do when I discuss propagation. Bromeliads are super low maintenance, and as far as lighting conditions, I'd say they are like other tropical plants. So in their natural habitat, they're going to be under canopies, leaf canopies, and they're going to be attached to the side of trees. So they're going to be getting dappled light. So that can qualify as bright and direct light. So what I would say is that these plants probably enjoy like bright morning light and then some shade in the afternoon when the sun is really, really intense, because the afternoon sun may crisp up the leaves and fade the beautiful bright colors that these plants have. But if they don't have enough light, the plant's going to suffer. So I'd say just set it near a window, and if you can give it some bright morning light, they would absolutely love that. You can also use some supplemental lighting. I'm a big fan of grow lights. I have them literally everywhere, and there's so many that they don't even look like grow lights. They just look like regular light bulbs. And so if your bromeliad is in a lower light area, just use some supplemental lighting and they should thrive. Watering for bromeliads is so easy and satisfying and fun, but so different than other tropical plants. I'm gonna do a demonstration on how to water. Again, these plants absorb water and nutrients through their leaves, not through the soil. So if the soil is too saturated, then the chances of it getting root rot are really, really high, because their roots really aren't made for that. Their roots are more made to help hold onto and latch them onto wherever surface they're on. So a lot of times people, like I said, will attach them to wood, you know, like people will do with orchids, because they're so epiphytic by nature. So what we want to do, instead of necessarily watering the soil too much, because that's your highest chance of root rot, is that we want to water it into the base of the leaves, also known as the tank. These plants are so interesting. It'll rain, this part of the plant will catch the water, and then it'll develop like a whole ecosystem where frogs will live in there, all sorts of cool stuff. A lot of people with terrariums or vivariums with frogs and all sorts of creatures will have bromeliads in there, and they're just fabulous plants for any kind of ecosystem. And so what you'll do is you'll pour water into here, and I'll demonstrate, and then it'll just create a waterfall effect, pouring water naturally into all the other little crevices in the leaves. And naturally, some of it will run off into the soil, which is totally fine. It's all right for there to be a little bit of moisture in the soil. You definitely don't want it to be saturated. So I'll demonstrate here. Make sure it's on camera. So you want to just pour it into the tank. You see how it's totally empty? Like, it should not. But the water will just fill up into the tank here, and then it just kind of drops off into all the other leaves until the whole thing has kind of a little waterfall cascade effect. And then it will eventually fill up each of the leaves, or a lot of the leaves, and then it will go into the soil a little bit, which is totally fine. We just don't want the soil to become oversaturated, but really the best way to prevent oversaturation of the soil is to switch the soil out to a really good, well-draining soil that's more for epiphytic bromeliads versus like other types of plants. So I'll discuss that. But yeah, so then you see like the tank should stay pretty full. Based on all my research, like there should be water pretty much in here at all times. And people will say like, oh, that will cause rot. You know, the inside of my plant rotted, or you know, the water gets stagnant. Now, if you want to, you know, dump the water out, you can, and put fresh new water, or just, you know, once a week or whatever, go in there and put new water, and that'll like flush out the old stagnant water. But in its natural habitat, no one's going around dumping out, you know, these plants in the natural rainforest. They're built for that. Really, where you're going to run into a problem with rot is if the soil gets way too saturated, or you have the incorrect type of soil, or you have way too much soil for the size of the root ball and the root system, which I'll talk about. But that's really it. They're the best. So you just go around once a week or whenever and just give it a little bit of, you know, a little water, and this plant will be happy as can be. Rainwater's great, distilled water's great, tap water's fine. The only thing with tap water is that it can cause like mineral buildup on the leaves. But this is tap water that I'm using, so it really depends on your type of tap water and what you're most comfortable with. Distilled and rainwater is always like the best way to go for any kind of houseplant. But, you know, don't be discouraged if all you have is tap water. That should be fine as well. Now, bromeliads being epiphytic, growing along the sides of trees, their soil needs to reflect that, and their soil is going to be a lot more like orchid soil than anything else. And these plants are actually potted up in regular potting mix. And so what I like to do when I bring a bromeliad home is I like to put it into a different type of soil that I know is going to prevent it from getting root rot. So again, with these bromeliads liking to be watered inside their tank or inside their leaves, their little roots are going to be way more susceptible to root rot when they get oversaturated, because they're just not built for that. Like, their soil roots are not going to be able to handle overly saturated soil. So it needs to be super well draining, super airy. That way I don't have to think about it every time I water the plant to make sure, oh no, did too much water get into the soil? I don't even have to think about it. I like to do this with as many plants as I can, make sure I'm potting it up in the correct type of soil for that type of plant that mimics its natural habitat, because the easiest way to kill a plant is root rot, and that just means way too much moisture in the soil for that plant. So you can easily create your own soil blend. I recommend like a 60% either orchid bark or pine bark, and then 20% maybe perlite, 20% potting mix if you want to do that. Just make sure it's super, super airy, chunky, just like you would with your orchids. So as you know, I'm partnered with repotme.com. They're super famous for their soils and their houseplant supplies. I'm very, very proud to be partnered with them. Today I'm going to be using their Bromeliad and Jewel Classic Orchid mix. So this is great for jewel orchids, which are absolutely beautiful. I love jewel orchids. But it's perfect for bromeliads as well, which I love that it can handle multiple plants. Just means I'm going to have to get some jewel orchids in here and do a little video for you on how to care for those too. This is what the soil looks like. There's a ton of bark. There's activated charcoal in here. There's a lot of perlite. I mean, just all sorts of good stuff. But at the same time, I can tell it is going to retain some moisture, which we definitely want. These plants do not need large pots. If anything, they enjoy a shallow pot, a smaller pot, because their root systems tend to be somewhat small. This one is in a nursery pot, and you can see here, this plant the soil is very moist. It doesn't need to be so wet. I just like to take a look, make sure there's no pests. You know, I did a good check through when I purchased this plant from the store. I always like to make sure there's nothing going on with the plant. If I see even a hint of a pest, I'm not bringing that plant home. I also recommend watering it, like giving it a good spray to get rid of any eggs when you first bring it home. You could also use some insecticidal soap to get rid of any unseen little pesties, and systemic granules are also a great option. So we have our little cover pot, which we can continue to use if we want. And then we have our nursery pot. And I pulled this plant out, and you can see, like, look, I don't know if you can tell, but there's a lot of soil. I mean, here down is all soil. So honestly, that pot was probably a little bit big for it. Now, a good time to repot for a bromeliad is when it's very, very compact. And when you just bring it home, if you want to switch it out and put it into a really well-draining soil blend, because this isn't really the best type of soil. Now, the roots are very fragile. It's always good to give your plant a little bit of a watering before you repot so that the roots are hydrated. So I'm using my clear slotted nursery pots that I get from repotme.com. You can get clear nursery pots from a lot of different places. I like these. They're specifically for orchids, so they have a ton of drainage holes. And not only does this provide amazing drainage, but then there's slots on the side, or little holes and slots on the side, which provide airflow. Just amazing across the board. So I think this is going to be a perfect size for this. And it'll fit into the cover pot as well if I want to continue using the cover pot. The only thing with cover pots is that you want to make sure that your plant isn't just sitting in water when you do water your plants. So yeah, this will be great. I can keep an eye on the roots. I can make sure that the moisture is good in there. All the above. And I don't want to mess too much with the root system because I don't want this plant to be spending a lot of time repairing roots when I want it to just chill and hang out with its beautiful bloom. And work on making pups too, because long term, that's how we keep the plant going. In we go. Stick that big bad boy in there. She's so cute. We're gonna push you in here. Uh-oh, making a mess. Here we go. Pack it on it. There you have it. Nice and repotted, good to go. It can go back in its cover pot if needed. I'm actually going to give this some water. This is the one time that I'll water into the soil directly because I want this plant, it's kind of wobbly, it's not super stabilized, and I want it to just get, let the soil kind of adjust around it. So I'm gonna water into the roots, and I'm not worried about overwatering because of the really good well-draining soil mixture. So you see how well draining that is? You can see the moisture with the clear nursery pot. Oh yeah, that feels way better. The soil is doing its job, it's well draining, but it's also retaining moisture. It's drained out, I'm gonna stick it in the cover pot. She's still a little lopsided. That's okay, water in the tank. Beautiful. And then I'm just gonna check the cover pot. You see how there's water in there? We don't want that. There we go. So we'll want the water to be in the little tank and not too saturating of the soil. So the pup is here. It only has one pup from what I can see. There may be more growing in here. And honestly, I think this pup needs to grow a little bit more before I propagate it now that I'm thinking about it. So I'm not going to pull this off, but I'm gonna explain what to do. So if this plant was a little bit bigger and this mother plant had kind of just was looking rough and has started to die off, what I could do is either leave it on this plant and over time this would turn into its own beautiful bromeliad and eventually bloom. And then this part of the plant that had died off, I would just like cut it all the way back. First, I would cut this part back once the bloom dies to reserve energy and allow that reserved energy to go towards the pups. Then what will happen, the pups will continue to grow into big, beautiful bromeliad plants, and the mother plant, what's left of it, will eventually die off. And you can just trim that back when all of the leaves brown and die off, and then this plant will just do its own thing. Or once this gets to 1/3 or 1/2 the size of the mother plant, you can just, people will just pull them off. Like you can just pull the little pup off. You can get a sharp knife and cut it off. The longer you wait, the better, because then it'll have more of a chance of having an established root system. This one probably doesn't yet. It's a little tiny. So what we want to do, if you decide you don't want to deal with the mother plant anymore, you just want to go ahead, it's 1/3 to 1/2 the size, you want to have a separate bromeliad plant because the mother plant will put off many pups. So sometimes there's as many as like 7 or 8 little pups on there. So what you can do at that point, like I said, remove it and then get its own little nursery pot, fill it up with soil. You want to put the little pup in here, and at that point you want to give it a good watering, and you'd want to water it into the tank of the new like pup or the little offshoot, and also the soil. And because you'll be using this type of soil, it'll be well draining enough to not cause root rot. And then over time, it'll just grow into the most beautiful bromeliad plant, and then it will eventually bloom and continue the cycle of life. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it on there so it gives it a chance to grow more. Now, so many tropical plants need really good fertilization. Like they need to be fertilized every week during the growing months or something. Bromeliad is not that. Bromeliads don't really need that much fertilization. They don't need any fertilization in the wintertime. They usually go dormant in the winter. They don't need it in the fall. So during the growing months, usually around spring to end of summer, I would go really light on the fertilizer. I mean, and you don't even really want to put it in the soil. You can just use like a little spray fertilizer like you would use for orchids or something like that, and dilute it. And maybe once every 6 weeks, give it a little spritz if you want to. Now, we have a lot of really knowledgeable people in our plant community, so feel free to leave like in the comments what kind of tips and tricks that you have for bromeliads, like fertilizing, propagation, all that kind of thing. So yeah, this plant is so beautiful. I just love these Bromeliad blooms. I mean, it was really hard choosing them because there were so many amazing ones to choose from the store. Yeah, these plants are so easy, especially if you like know what they need. I had no idea about all of this stuff with bromeliads until I really started getting into plants, and I mean, they're so interesting and cool. So as far as temperature and humidity, especially for temperature, I always say if you're comfortable, your plants are comfortable. If you're cold, your plants are cold. Most of these plants that we bring into our home are tropical plants, and they like warmer temperatures. So don't put them outside unless you live in an area where it's warm all year long, or bring them in when it gets cold outside. Bromeliads thrive outside, especially if it's warm with a lot of humidity. They would absolutely love that. But they cannot withstand the cold and super, super low humidity. Now, they can be susceptible to pests like other houseplants. You can treat these pests easily with insecticidal soap, systemic granules, neem oil. Like there's a lot of different treatments that you can use. There's a lot of great natural at-home remedies. Everyone can feel free to leave their tips and tricks on combating pests. People worry about fungus gnats with leaving water in the plant tank and in the leaves. Now, fungus gnats typically don't breed in like stagnant water. They'll breed in moist soil. So that's another reason to make sure that you have a really good well-draining soil mixture, and that the soil, isn't overly saturated all the time. You can also put like a little top dressing if you want to of either orchid bark or rocks or something like that helps prevent the fungus gnats. You can use mosquito bits. Also, systemic granules I've found gets rid of fungus gnats. Since using the systemic granules, I don't even have to use mosquito bits anymore because it just like gets rid of all the fungus gnats. I originally started using that for thrips because it was the only thing that would get rid of thrips. But now, like, I don't see mealybugs when I use it. I don't see fungus gnats when I use them. So the only thing that systemic granules won't touch are spider mites, and the insecticidal soap takes care of spider mites. So there you have it. Those are all the high-level things that you need to know about bromeliads to make sure that they thrive in your care. I hope this was helpful. Again, like there were so many things that I didn't even realize about bromeliads when I first got started, and I just find that the instructions can be so lacking with these plants because other tropical plants, the watering on this one's completely different. The soil's completely different. Like it needs to be treated very uniquely, but however, it seems to be even lower maintenance than a lot of other plants. If you'd like to see future plant shopping and plant care videos, definitely subscribe so they show up in your newsfeed. We have an amazing community on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. I've linked all of my products that I use today in the description below, including this gorgeous potting mat. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and that I get to see you soon. Bye.